Hello.
Hey, Jason.
Very well.
Hello.
Do we have enough people to start? I had the first topic on the agenda. Who is
Yeah, there's 9 of us here. We can get going.
Okay. Give me just a minute while I share the screen.
Good day, folks.
Yeah.
And let's see. Looks like everybody's just getting started anyway.
All right. Are folks able to see the screen?
Sorry, Glenn, what was that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm able to see that.
Okay. So I went through the comments. I took, this is for the notation signing and verification extensibility. Right now, the focus is only the signing workflow, and we're defining the plugin model for third-party vendors or basically anybody to integrate into notation with integration to their key material or key service, HSM, etc. At a high level, there are a few areas that I wanted to discuss with the community. I wasn't here last week, so I took the feedback around. There's feedback from Steve around the path for the plugin, and Sajay for what the plugin executable is called. I've incorporated that. In the Discover, let's see. Right now, there are only 2 signing capabilities, and that's the only documentation here, Steve. As we add more, I'll add more documentation to it.
And it made sense that the verification could be local for now.
Yeah. Sajay had feedback on the notation key describe. I've added a section that describes it. If you do a key describe, we can make that show the key definition, plugin discover if there's an associated plugin, and the describe key for that specific key. Let's see what else changed. Okay, I have a few questions or open items for discussion here. So there's a question on the versioning. This is basically provision for, this is the contract version of what messages are sent between notation and the plugin. it's not directly related to the version of notation plugin or notation CLI or library. And I'll add another section here. I don't want to over-engineer, but have a basic sense of when we add new optional parameters or we make breaking changes in notation for this plugin contract, how do you communicate that to plugins? And plugins can outright reject if the versions don't match. And plugins could implement multiple versions of the contract. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think what I heard you say is the CLI, the go live, whatever, are going to continue to version, but the payload that gets handed off may not change. So it's like we're versioning the payload. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah. So we're defining some high-level interfaces or contracts between notation and plugin. They should be fairly stable, but I think as we add features, we might add additional optional parameters, either a request or response, some way to communicate that. And I think when we do major version releases of notation, the contracts may break. So you should be able to indicate that to the plugin, and plugin can react accordingly, including saying, I don't know about this version, so I'm just gonna return an error.
Is
it
that
the version of the
really on the
spec,
plugin
maybe?
to do?
I'm sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm thinking, is that really on the plugin to do? If we upgrade the client should know that the plugin is an older version. And so the client would respond back and work with an older version of the API to work with the plugin.
What I was trying to translate it back to the specs, actually. So this is what I think is part of what you're saying is, the CLI and the Go libraries, those are going to continue to version. Like we're going to add things, we'll add things that have nothing to do with the behavior, maybe a polished output or whatever. I think what we're saying is this is like there's a spec on the payload that gets handed off, and it's the version of the spec that comes across. So yes, you could have a newer version or an older version of the client, but they still have a certain version of the payload that they pass off. So if I take an updated version of Notation AKV or Azure KV, then if this payload didn't change, I'm still handling that. And I know that because of the version.
Go ahead, Brandon.
I would push to move something to the Discover section and have the Discover give you the version of the spec that the plugin knows.
Yep.
And then the client, the client, when it's calling the plugin, knows, okay, this plugin has an older version of the API. I need to down rev whatever I'm talking to it with. Yeah,
that makes sense. I haven't made the updates related to it, but that is the intent of versioning. In the PR version that I submit, those changes will be there. I'm not trying to find a balance between trying to over-engineer this and have minimum contract versioning. So, and again, this is not super critical for this initial draft or initial version of this, but we should have a section talk about versioning.
It's never critical for version 1. It's only when you do version 2 that it's critical. Like, damn, we didn't do versioning. I think what you said is instead of putting it in the payload, is basically put it in the Discover API. So this way, in fact, it might actually be a different API I call for version 2. So like if we decide to split things out into 2, because we consolidated, I think, over the last meeting. So to know that this thing supports version 1, 2, and 3, let's say, then a client can say, oh, great, I actually need version 2. So it knows how to call the version 2. It knows how to interact over version 2.
Yeah, I'm thinking on those lines. I'll update.
Okay, sweet.
I'll move on to the next one. Actually, before we get into the feedback from Brandon on describe key, returning the optional third chain, I think from the last week's, I looked at the meeting notes. There's fundamental questions on should the signature generator interface be even present, and that it is a subset of the envelope generator. So why do we need it? The reason I put it in is that is kind of the least path of resistance for somebody to implement an integration with notation without having to know the envelope and signature format details. I think it has a couple of downsides though, like the hashing is done by notation, so we have to define what it means for a FIPS mode for notation looks like, because that would mean notation would have to interact with the FIPS validated library and generate the hash as per that. That is one downside of it. But the plus side is if you're integrating with a KMS or local YubiKey, you just have to call a sign hash function on that particular key provider or whatever, and don't have to worry about any other details. All of the rest of the workflow, including assembling the envelope details, etc., is handled by notation. There was also a question on why can't the hash be calculated by the plugin? So pass the payload here. The reason is, or with the aim of trying to make this simple, the hash is usually over the payload plus other signed attributes, and those other signed attributes are in the signature format. So for example, in JWS, you have like IAT, EXP, the payload includes the original payload plus additional things. For example, with Dizzy, you define a particular payload format. With PKCS7, again, you have a field which includes the payload plus additional standard attributes. So the moment we put the hash calculation into the plugin needs to be signature format or envelope format aware.
I feel like you're also getting into canonical JSON questions. So if you do the hashing inside of our side and don't have the plugin do it for us, then we have to do that canonicalization on our side to make sure we always render the JSON the same way. And similarly, if you push it off, they have to do it the same way on their side as well. So for me, the ideal is if we can get this to the point that it's just a stream of bytes and that's packaged along, but I don't think every one of the signing solutions is going to handle that for us.
Sorry, I didn't get your second sentence or the last bit.
I think there are going to be some signing solutions that they're not going to have the stream of bytes as part of the signed stuff that comes back. It's going to say, here's your signature, and it's just on whatever hash we had in there. And the next person needs to verify the signature has to do that canonicalization the exact same way again on their side, right? Or am I misunderstanding that?
So we haven't discussed canonicalization in detail, but my initial thought on that is we are not going on specifically how the payload JSON looks, but the attributes within that JSON, which is descriptor fields.
Yeah, but I just have a question. So how do you make the signatures match then when you're verifying? Because if the bytes have to look the same, right, on the other end, and JSON doesn't require an order by default for those bytes.
So for our simple payload right now, which is the descriptor, we can define a canonicalization order. I still have to think. I understand canonicalization in other contexts. In this particular one, where we check descriptor attributes, I'm still not clear on how that matters, but we can spend time on that separately. I think at a high level, the question is, I basically put forward motivations on why we have the generate signature simple interface. Do people feel we should keep this? We can even start with the envelope generator and the complexities of assembling the envelope. Some of that can be mitigated by notation, Golab, exporting or exposing some of its envelope classes so that you can reuse that. That again limits you to just Go implementation. Otherwise, you're implementing envelope format totally on your own.
Yeah, that's the direction that I would push for, is to at least start with just the envelope generation and then see if we really need the signature generation later on.
Okay.
which my
Uh,
suspicion is we won't, but if we do, we've got that out later on.
Yeah, we don't have anybody specifically working on a generate signature or like YubiKey or PKCS11 integration right now. We can hold off till an actual case comes up. All right. We talked about signature interface. This is fine. A related question is, should notation perform basic signature validation on the plugin response? I think yes. I would like to hear if there are any reasons we shouldn't. So if, for example, with the generate envelope, once we hand over this request, get the response back, the signature envelope can be basically, as long as you know the algorithm, you can validate it. There's a question of how some non-standard algorithms can be handled, and we can take a position there where known algorithms or approved algorithms will be validated. I think there are some cases where other algorithms like SM3, SM2 may be implemented, and we could choose to ignore them. Any thoughts on that? The validating the response, I haven't covered it explicitly, but the next version is going to include that. All right, I don't hear any objection to that. Next one was the payload type and envelope type. So I think this is also related to, there's a PR that Brandon published on the Notary V2 signature. Let me skip to here. In here, basically taking this descriptor and pushing it one level up, so we don't have one extra level of one extra key level or nesting. The initial thought there was, besides this descriptor plus annotation, we could add other keys here, and that was basically a provision for including any other structures that may not go very well in the annotations, which is just key value. You can't do maps, other like lists in a very straightforward way. Like one of the thoughts there was, right now we are signing only a descriptor. If it was say a in toto attestation or any other form of attestation, which is quite a nested structure. It was like a provision to support some of those. Those may also be supported by, you have the attestation itself as a separate artifact and generate signature over it with a signature manifest and blah. But if we agree to keep that problem aside, or in future if we need additional payload types, define additional payload types, I'm fine pulling this up and having the payload just be a plain descriptor.
Yeah, I think it raises the question of what are we signing? Because originally for the longest time we were saying the thing we're signing is just a descriptor, and that was it. And then we threw this extra layer in there, and it kind of raised the question, well, maybe we're not just signing a descriptor, we're signing other stuff potentially. So something to keep in mind is that the descriptor field itself from OCI, it's got the specific fields in there, but they've got their extension definition on OCI, which says you can always add additional fields in there for your own uses if you need to. And those should be ignored by other things that are reading this if they don't understand it.
Okay, so within the descriptor structure itself, apart from the annotations, you could have other keys. Okay.
Yeah, you're allowed to. It's not beautiful, but if you need to do it, it's an option for you.
Okay, and basically whoever is reading it should ignore it.
Well, if you don't understand it, you can ignore it. I think the other part is the things that we've been talking about, and we don't have to do it in this version right now, was the ability to sign things that weren't descriptors in a registry, so that notation can sign generic things, whether it be an SBOM or other content. So it's more, it's signing a hash, and what that hash is handed off is communicated and then responded. So whether it be extra properties in a payload for a registry, or a hash of a file, that might be, those would equally work.
So I don't follow there, Steve. You're saying it's something else in a registry, but without a descriptor.
No, so it's not in a registry. In other words, you can use notation to
Okay.
sign things that are not registry specific. So there's
Okay.
binaries for hardware, IoT, and so forth.
My vote is just shove everything in the registry, but that's me. Go
I-
ahead, Jason.
Yes, there's, that'll certainly be one, but even in Microsoft, we distribute things on multiple things. Even though we're centralizing an MCR, we have other existing systems, so we want to be able to assign those as well.
To that end, it's a nice thing that the descriptor spec is in image spec, which is separate from distribution spec. A descriptor can exist outside of a registry. It just describes the hash of some content, the size of some content, the type of some content, possibly annotations. To Brandon's point, possibly other random keys that people stuff in there, but a descriptor doesn't necessarily mean that it's in a registry.
It is interesting to think about it that way.
Like I can take the descriptor of a local file, for instance.
So no, it could be the digest of the file, not just the manifest of it. So that
Right. I
I was
think
actually
that
thinking we would take the digest of it. I didn't really think of just taking the whole descriptor as well. That is interesting.
Or you build a descriptor on it. So you give it your own custom E type, throw the digest, throw the size. Now you got a descriptor.
That's a good point. All right, I got my answer. I'll respond back on that PR. I think we should be good with that change related to pushing up the descriptor and removing one level of nesting. So payload type and envelope type. So in here for the envelope generator, we have the payload type. This is the input payload, which is just a descriptor, and in some signature formats, we append additional things like in JWS, we create a wrap payload. So you have IATN, EXP format specific added onto it. And we sign this payload. And we have this content type, which we have defined the specific content type. So there's a little bit of a mismatch here. The payload type is fine for this particular case. We'll pass it in as a descriptor. I have a signature envelope type in the request, which currently matches to the wrap payload type and not really the JWS envelope response. I wanted to have a discussion here. Like it's changing the meaning a little bit, and I'm not sure what is the best way to capture this. But what I really want here is signature envelope type expected from the plugin, but not limited to just that this is any JWS token or signed data. That it is a specific. It's over a specific payload type that Notary has described. Does that make sense? I'm open to suggestions to handle this differently. There's a little bit of semantic difference between what this calls out and what it actually is. Or I can change this to be worded a little differently, instead of being just a plain signature envelope type.
Shiva, what do you think?
Signature envelope type is similar to artifact type. That's where you want to commit. What type of signature is it?
I
He's
think
using an IANA format there, so it's just we're using the IANA format in the OCI stuff as well. So that's the overlap. That's why it looks familiar. If that's what you're thinking.
So why do we need a signature envelope type?
So if we support multiple concurrent or variations in our signature envelope type, or it's also related to the payload. We may have a different version of newer version of the payload that includes additional attributes that have significance. And with the envelope type, if we evolve the signature, either the envelope format or the payload that we sign using that format, that should be indicated. Again, it's a versioning problem, not an issue for 1.0, but the moment you try to introduce another payload format or envelope format, things will start breaking.
I think it should be in the, so instead of in the request, we should have the envelope type in the response, maybe. If you have two versions of plugins, then you should have two versions, like version 1 of the plugin, version 2 with two binaries, not a combined binary.
So the envelope type is what is, I think the example would be Notary ships with a particular envelope type, and it expects plugins to give that back as response. If we introduce a new envelope type or payload type, that won't become the standard default right away. We'll probably publish the spec for it and expect plugins, gives them some time to implement that before we make that the default. And at some point we say, okay, now we want to switch over to that newer format. That is why I have notation pass that in as this is the envelope type that it requires the plugin to return.
But what if a plugin can provide a new envelope type that it is not recognized by notation CLI? It's possible, right?
Yeah, the plugin could be newer than the notation CLI that's on the machine.
Yeah, that would happen in that case. And my sense is notation would reject that response.
But why? I think it can accept it because you have you delegate the whole signing stuffs to the plugin, so the plugin generates the envelope, and this should be decoupled with the notation CLI.
Right, but these are still you expect them to conform with whatever notation defines, right? So I think in that particular case, you would update notation to the latest version. Otherwise, you can, and this is a larger question on like what level of enforcement. The plugin basically opens this up, but you want some control over what plugins return. Otherwise, you could have any kind of response or newer envelope types being returned, and then, for example, this is just a signing interface. We haven't got into verification, but we fall back on standard verification if that doesn't have associated plugin. So notation may not even understand the response, that particular envelope type, and be able to verify it, which just breaks the workflow. So I think I'm looking at extensibility as not a fully open model where anybody can implement any envelope format, but a more controlled one where notation defines these are the set of signature formats and payload types that it supports, and it expects plugins to conform to that. And if there are other use cases, we basically work with whoever needs those envelope types or payload types to be included and incorporate them in notation. Notation needs to be aware of what gets passed through. Go ahead, Faisal.
So just wanted to add my comments here that yes, I agree, and I see the point that okay, in the request if we add such capability where we are also defining what should be the response of the plugin, right? This is good, right? What I would suggest here is that in the response as well, if we could have some parameter defining that, okay, this type of response has been returned, right? And just as a double check, so that when Notary basically picks it up, Notary probably can basically look at that parameter and say, okay, this is the type of response I have received. If this fits my agenda, if this fits something that I understand, great, I will parse it. Otherwise, I will just reject the whole thing.
That makes, I mean, we can include that. That's kind of like a optimization. It also kind of documents it in the response. I'll take that feedback. I'll continue on to the next topic. Again, I'll publish I think in the PR, I'll indicate whichever sections need more discussion, and we can continue those in the PR. But I wanted to cover these with the folks here. I think that's about it. On the chaining plugins, I see the value, but I don't want to get into it right away. I think after we get initial version of this, we can think about chaining plugins. What as I understand, what that really gives you is somebody can compose a signing provider out of things available through notation and outside of notation. Like there may be a particular plugin that does transparency log push, and you can optionally add that and compose it. Again, there'll be more semantics to be defined there on what things go in what stages. I think it's a little more complicated. That's about it, what I wanted to cover. Next steps here, I'll take some of the feedback that we covered here, and I think some of the still contentious stuff, I'll indicate those in the PR.
I think helpful to me is if we get the verification extensibility defined in here, because that's where I'm very fuzzy on what's happening with this, how we're generating all these signatures. Does the verification need to redo the canonicalization of the JSON? Do we need to somehow get the key to know that we're trusting it, that sort of thing, or how that all works? So the more we can define that, the better for me.
Yeah, we can spend just a couple of minutes on that. Were there questions in the last meeting on key acquisition, etc.? Like in the basic verification workflow, the key is available through config. So you have, and we have a, let me pull that up quickly. So Pritesh submitted this with PR, which is committed now. It isn't implemented in notation yet. We are going to have another revision of this, which has scopes defined. But the basic idea is you have trust stores defined, right? Either inline or on disk, etc. And in the policy, you define these are the trust stores you want to use. We'll additionally have scope in here, and we'll additionally have some anchoring in here optionally. So you can say root plus specific anchors. And that should give you enough information from keys to use for verification. Is there a gap there?
I think there is a gap. Because what's not clear to me is if I sign it with a key that's been delegated to from a root trust store, and our trust store only lists the roots in there, how do I get my delegated key to be verified? Where is that certificate chain getting passed around, or is it, and how does that work? And so that's where I'm still fuzzy.
You have the certificate chain in the signature envelope.
Is it?
Yeah, the response, at least in the JWS, you have the X5C here, which is the full certificate chain.
And is that all envelopes, or is that, considering we have the option for someone to generate their own envelope?
Yeah, it would expect at least till we discuss a particular scenario where it doesn't need to be there. Currently we expect the signature envelope to be there.
Okay.
It's a mandatory field.
Yeah, so those are kind of the things that I'm working through in my head, trying to understand how this all plays together. And so
Okay, so
if we flesh that out a little bit, that'll help me.
sure. So some of that is already in here. So this defines like how the signature is going to be validated. I think we'll make a pass through here, see if canonicalization, where does canonicalization fit in here? Scopes and anchors are some of the next changes in here. And I think one of the other problems that we haven't addressed is because notation or notary supports multiple signatures for artifact, and you have the references API returning what signatures are associated with this artifact. When you try to evaluate it against a trust store, so you may have something in the trust store. You have one certificate chain in the envelope, and you have multiple signatures associated with the artifact. There's a bit of how do you get to the correct signature? You have a trust store. You call the referral API, references API, got a set of signatures. How do you match up what lines with your trust store or with your policy? We still haven't defined. But again, right now we are assuming there's one signature. It just works, but we need to extend that. I'm done with my question. Thanks for the feedback.
So this is Faisal. Just a couple of questions here. I see there is a comment about what providers will be supported. So do we have a list of providers that we are right now targeting that they will be supported like built-in, or we are expecting that everything will be built, for example, using plugins? I'm especially interested to know about PIV and PKCS 11. Is it something that someone is targeting, or what's the status here?
That's a good question. I didn't cover that because there's all other bunch of technical things to go through. At least I don't have we haven't had that discussion, I think is the correct answer. We do want to enable some basic signing. Verification will already be there if we have all of the other bits defined. Like unless you are doing some special pieces of verification or say trying to do some custom revocation check, etc., you won't need to implement the verification interfaces when we define them. From signing, I think probably the minimum required is being able to sign with a local certificate and encrypted key on disk. That's my initial thought. We can either build PKCS 11 and PIV support into notation itself, or if somebody is interested, they can implement it as a plugin. I don't have a strong opinion there, but that's kind of the initial answer. We haven't had this discussion.
Yeah, we've got X509 currently in the default behavior, so it's more a matter of what do we need to do beyond that. So yes, I think the main piece, the main pivot is what's in notation should be, not vendor or project kind of specific. It should be like, here's a very simple thing, so not just simple in the sense of overly simple, but the point is it functions, it's not cloud or vendor specific. The cloud or vendor specific stuff should happen without having any integration, any changes in the notation binary. So those could be created without the notation team knowing, or versioned, for security fixes or otherwise independent.
Yep. And this is why I think choosing a specification or a standard that is generic in nature, like PKCS 11 is one of those standards that that are more of standard right now. If you're looking to kind of secure your keys and in hardware, right? So so yeah, that is something that I mean, let's have that discussion that, okay, what providers by default should be supported. From my side, PKCS 11 would be one. All other providers like CSP, KSP, they are more OS dependent, right? Like they can be deployed on Windows only, but then it will cause issue on Linux and Mac OS. But yeah, I mean, as far as I know, PKCS 11 is that standard that can provide coverage across different platforms, and also is kind of a standard. But there might be others out there. I'm just not giving my input here. Yeah.
I think open an issue, and if we, if it makes sense and somebody wants to write it, that'd be awesome.
And I think the plugin interface definitely allows people to implement stuff without it being inbuilt. Could be available as a first version, and you could have some more standard things pushed into notation as we go on.
Yeah, sure. I'll open a PR related to that. Just a quick question. I was not, I never attended Notary version 1 things. Did Notary version 1 ever supported PKCS 11? It's just for my information. The version 1 that we had for Notary.
I don't think so. We do have Marina on the call. She may have a better answer.
I don't think so. I'd have to double check.
Notary V1 supported hardware tokens. I don't know if it supported the full PKCS 11 API or just the smaller PIV one though that YubiKeys use.
Okay. So did we? So I think we never explored FIDO2, for example, in the past, right? This is my understanding.
I mean, Notary V1 with the Docker content trust stuff just didn't get very far. So
okay. Yeah, just a off question, right? So yeah. Regarding version.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the agenda. There's one item by Jason. I want to make sure there's enough time to cover that.
Yeah, I think this might be a good time to switch. I'm sure we'll talk more about this in the future. So, all right, Jason, I think you had the next thing.
Yeah, thank you. 2 things. One very quick. I noticed that the YouTube recordings are a bit out of date. I was actually really interested in the conversation last week about this topic I'm about to bring up, but I couldn't find them. I don't know if they're up there and just not at the link in the HackMD, or if they're just not up.
I'll double check. I thought I finished them. I remember. I'll double check.
Everything's terrible. I completely get it.
No, it's me. I'll double check them today.
And so the actual topic that I wanted to talk about was Brandon's HackMD about various options for supporting storing signatures and other things in registries that don't support references. My interest is in supporting Quay. I'm from Red Hat, and I'm interested in supporting Quay, but also in general, any old registry, because any current registry that as soon as references exists will become an old registry and won't immediately adopt new APIs as soon as they're minted. So first, I guess, Brandon, thank you for writing all of that up. That was great, and I added some comments. And so only HackMD doesn't notify you when someone replies to your comments, so I only responded to them today. But I don't know. There was a lot of lively discussion in the comments, and I wanted to bring it up here. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I really want to get it moved into a pull request so that it's easier to see changes and whatnot. It's just going to take a little bit of work to turn that into a pull request, I think.
Definitely. I mean, pull requests are also differently terrible, so there is no good place to discuss things.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I've been debating on how much the HackMD versus the discussion stuff, because the discussions, the HackMD is great for certain things like what we do with notes, but when they're tracked from a project, it's, so what I've been trying to do is just, I think we did it in this case, is there's an issue in GitHub under the project that points to HackMD, so at least you can find it. Yeah, so Brendan and I talked a little bit, in the HackMD, and then we pinged each other offline a little bit, just talking more about it. I think this kind of goes back to what, the whole requirements and design kind of conversations, right? It's like lots of great designs. What requirements we trying to achieve? And it's not just fallback, it'll become the basis for the references conversation in the OCI, and what is a quick versus long versus, all the stuff we're doing now is not, as much as we sit in this vacuum and get excited about it and how fast people will adopt it, there's still cuts, they're still trying to understand what a container is. So whatever we do now or the next 6 months is going to be impact for years to come. So what I was just trying to hope we can do is get back and list, here are the list of requirements. Most of them came from the Notary V2 work that we were doing with remote and blah, blah, blah. And agree on what those requirements are. And then obviously the assumption is the fallback support won't meet all those requirements, because if it does, then we don't need to do the references work, right? I mean, like,
yeah, that would be nice.
There is some logical thing. And I don't want to start with the end in mind from the assumption of what will happen. So I think, if, like, for instance, it's currently titled fallback, but yet it has a new manifest, well, as one of the options. So it kind of just, and I get the juggle happens. So I think I was hoping we can just have, look, here's the list of requirements before we get to any solutions. And maybe we even upfront, we say, look, here's what an artifact is, here's what a reference type is implied to be, and then here's the list of things that we need to do. And then if we actually first work on agreeing on that list before we work on solutionizing it, and then we could come back and say, okay, now that we agree on, here's the quick bullet, number 1, 2, and 3, here's a 1 or 3 sentence definition of each, that now we could say, okay, now we have some. Here is an option that you do absolutely nothing to a registry. This is what, can be done. And absolutely nothing means like there's no changes in tag filtering and all the other stuff, because that was kind of the goal, was like nothing changes in the registry. Then there's, if we can version the existing manifests, like that has been the big furball that Jason, you brought up in the OCI summit. If that's possible, what can we do there? And if we go with a new manifest, what can be done there? And then we just look at them, because each of them have costs and impacts. That's the trade-off. But I think we just need to agree on what those requirements are.
Can I get a quick clarification? Which one are you saying is the new manifest? Because each one of these to me is a new manifest.
I have to pull it up again, but I thought you had one in there that specifically said, one of the answers was, or not answers, let me pull it up, hold on a second. Wait, am I in the right thing? Yeah, Notary fallback support. In the table you had at the bottom, separate manifest index.
So the table at the bottom is just kind of a cross of the goals on the left column, and across the top are the possible implementations.
Maybe I remembered it wrong. Unless it changed. I thought separate manifest and index. Maybe that was the one I was thinking, new manifest. Anyway, maybe I remembered it wrong.
Yeah, I was just looking for a little clarification on that one. I do think in general, I know you've kind of got a mental idea of what you'd like to see this look like, and I'm just not quite understanding what exactly you're looking for. So it might just make sense if you've got some time to spend to throw something like that together and say, okay, here's the answer that you'd like to see instead. That might be helpful.
Yeah, I think especially like Steve, you were talking about gathering requirements before we embark on solutionizing. I agree, but I think Brandon's requirements or goals at the top of that doc is pretty exhaustive and well researched. And I think we've talked about the requirements quite a lot. I think it's time to start looking at solutions that work. I know that the tag listing issue, I mentioned that I think it's a relatively small one. I think what I meant was if the cost of having a compatible fallback solution for all existing registries, for all OCI v1.0 compliant registries, if the cost of that is that the tag list is a little polluted, that is a cost I think I would personally accept in the meantime until references comes around and fixes it. And so that's sort of like, all of these have the same weight in the doc, except I think that one is the smallest weight of those things. You clearly need to be able to sign something by digest. You clearly need that digest not to change when you sign it. You clearly need to be able to pull and run the thing. Like, those are like P0 must-haves, and not polluting the tag list, I think, is like a P3 nice to have. It would be super if we didn't pollute the tags, but if that's the cost of getting all the other ones done, that's what I meant was I think that is worth.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. My only comment there is I think different people might have different weightings for some of these things.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Some
Yeah.
companies might say, we really don't want to pollute our tag list because that's what we're looking at every day. We don't care as much about the race conditions because we control exactly who is pushing a signature every time, and we can avoid those. And so they may have a different priority list for their specific scenario, and we need to figure out how to balance everybody's, and it's an impossible problem at that point.
Yeah, I do think we all agree on like the image that is signed, it must be pullable, like you can't get away with that. Anyway, Steve, you still have your hand up. I think you're next.
Oh, I didn't pull that. I think what you're saying, yes, the goals is that absolutely that beginning. I think if we put some numbers on them, and then we put a description next to each one, and then the table at the bottom references those same numbers. It's all right, which one of these achieves what?
Yeah, I think that's a useful
I do think
edit.
we're super close. But I wouldn't call it like, this is part of the feedback, because I wouldn't start with its registry fallback support. It's like, what are we trying to achieve with reference types? And there's a bunch of other things in there around, and I just didn't get a chance to edit them all. I think I even had an ellipse at the bottom so I could attach a comment to it at one point, because I didn't want to just go edit the doc directly. Was like, do we support multiple blobs in a thing? What are we doing around lifecycle management? That's not called out here. Like there's implications of the tags. Like this is part of what the definitions up front is. Many customers use tags as the way they manage their lifecycle. And that's the way the reference types was originally designed, was you can still manage the lifecycle that way. I totally acknowledge that we're going to have some kind of fallback. We've always said that. So there will be some trade-off, and something to do with tags will have some impact on it. But I don't know if we know that answer. The current proposals have, well, I don't want to get into solutionizing, but like, let's list those things out. And if we can agree on what those are, then it's great. So I think we're close. I do think we're close.
Great.
A quick question. I haven't looked at this topic in detail. How does immutable tags interact with this?
Immutable tags or mutable tags? Sorry, I misheard it.
Immutable, as in some registries will have a setting where you cannot, I guess, reassign the tag.
Are you talking about a tag on the initial thing, like when we say netmonitor v1? Or are you talking about the tag that's assigned to the signature, for instance?
Tag assigned to the signature.
Yeah, I think immutable tags are going to break a lot of these solutions if you want the ability to update it. If you don't need the ability to update it with a new signature after the fact, and you just push your image and your tag at one time, you'll be okay.
I think I would
multiple signatures.
Yeah, Brandon, I think I would rephrase that a bit more positively, which is, if you want to prevent people from appending a signature, immutable tags allow you to do that. If you want to allow mutable signature, or more signers to append to the thing afterwards, make your tag mutable, and that will work. So it is like, it's another feature layered on top that a registry could support, to say like, okay, well, I've got my 3 signatures on this that I need. Some admin locks it down and says, we don't need a 4th, whatever. I think that we could spin it positively, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
there was along that line. I know there was a request to do something like that, where people couldn't push abstract things later on to your image and modify what your image was after the fact. If we go with that OCI index that contains the platform specific images and the signatures in there, you could get the digest of that index, and then that's no longer mutable at that point. And so you've got that way of doing it as well.
So I know everybody loves going into designing the solutions. Can we go back and capture the underlying requirement, like the underlying requirement? If we want to make a requirement saying that we want to block additional references being added, let's capture that. Because I have concerns around the current cosign model of putting multiple signatures as different blobs in a single manifest. Like there's problems with that as well. So I'd rather go back and what is the requirement we're trying to capture. And Brandon and I chatted about this briefly also. It's like, look, if we think fallback support should only support signatures, that's actually fairly straightforward. I don't believe that that's the bar we should call, because I think while we started Notary around signatures, the outcome was reference types, which as we were building Notary, SBOMs became, really front and center. So like, hey, we can actually add those as well. So I think we're well past just supporting signatures.
Yeah, I agree. I think if there are missing requirements in that list, I think that is a good list of requirements. If there are ones that you identify as missing, you should, I think, well, I can speak for Brandon, go ahead and add them, I guess, and we'll consider them. But I think the list we have is at least nearly all of them, if not all of them. I don't think I want to call out specific support for registries that have immutable tags, because that is not every registry. That is not, guarded, documented at all in OCI. That is not like, that's registry specific behavior. I could go build a registry that only lets you push tags named Steve, right? Like you don't have to take that requirement into account in this proposal.
Well, but I think there are practices, like there are various registries have implemented eventing. We've all implemented it slightly different, but there is a concept of eventing. There is a concept of tag and digest locking or repo locking. So I think we could reference a requirement, and we might not look, if we think this requirement is really good, and we want to solve it, and we don't want to all do it differently because we're trying to write a common binary that works across registries, then maybe we should come back and say, hey, maybe we should add tag locking to the registry, just as an example. So I wouldn't want to avoid a common paradigm that people use and not put the requirement in the list, because I think that will shed some light on the type of solutions we look at.
In that case, I think it's, if you feel like adding that as a requirement, I think it would also put it as a lower requirement, like a lower priority requirement than must be able to run the image, which is like must have. If you want to have language that says, a registry that supports immutable tags in some undefined way can also work with this scheme, I think that's a useful signal to put in the checkbox array at the bottom. But I also, to what I was saying before, I wouldn't necessarily consider it a deficiency that you have this control. I would consider it maybe a feature that you could lock, an admin could lock off, okay, no new signatures or whatever.
I agree. All I'm saying, I don't know if we're going to get to an agreement on the overall priority. I think what will happen is we'll get this long list, and there'll be a bake-off of proposals that people will throw at it because everybody wants to jump into designs, and then we'll weigh that bake-off to them. Like, I don't know if any one solution is going to solve all the lines. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think what I'm just trying to come back to is, let's not worry about whether multiple signatures can be put into a single manifest or not, or whether annotations. Let's go back and catch it. What is it we're trying to do? Because one of the things we're trying to do is not make any changes to a registry. There's some trade-offs that we'll make to get that, and that might be fine. I think.
Milind
also has his hand up. I want to make sure if that's
goes on that. I think that's an example of, so like specifically immutable tags. There might be other factors, but this specifically, like even if it may not be standard, I don't know how many registries implement it. What I wanted to be called out in the fallback is, and the mechanism that we end up is, these are the specific ways, or let me put it the other way. If I use a registry which supports immutable tags and I've enabled it for my images, and I now go on to the signatures and tags related to signatures, whether the tags support multiple signatures or not, or can I update them or not, I think that's a separate aspect. I've enabled immutable tags primarily for my image tags not to be updated, right? So can I use the fallback in that environment or not? I think those kind of factors need to be called out, saying this is the fallback and you can use it in these specific cases. Does that make sense? That is what I was expecting.
It makes sense to me. I'm going to go ahead and add as an extra bullet point here just so we cover it.
Cool. I have to drop, but thank you everyone for the discussion, and we'll pick it up in the HackMD or Slack or wherever. And thanks again, Brandon, for writing all of that up. That was great. See everyone.
Thanks, folks.